Okay, so this is for the quadratic formula worksheet. All right, so first we want to write down our quadratic formula. So that is going to be x equals negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. All right. And then it's asking what form the quadratic equation needs to be in before we can use the quadratic formula. So it always is going to have to be set equal to 0. So it would need to look like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, so now we're going to use this information to work out these next 6 problems to find the solutions to our functions here. Okay, so starting with number 1, I see that my equation is already set equal to 0, so I don't have to do any work with that. So I just now can go in and start labeling my a, b, and c. So my a is going to be 1, b is going to be negative 8, and c is going to be 10. So now I'm ready to plug them into the formula. So I'm going to have x equals negative, and then my b value, which is negative 8, plus minus the square root of my negative 8 squared, because that's my b value, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Okay, so now I want to first start simplifying this. So these two negatives right here are going to give me a positive, so that's going to just be 8 plus or minus. So now I'm going to use my calculator to plug in what's inside the square root. So that's negative 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 10. That gives me 24. So that means I have 8 plus or minus the square root of 24, all divided by 2 times 1 just gives me 2. All right, so now I want to find my 2 solutions. So this is going to break up and be 8 plus the square root of 24 divided by 2, and 8 minus the square root of 24 divided by 2. So now let me put this into my calculator to find my solution. So first I have 8 plus the square root of 24, all divided by 2. So that's one of my solutions, and I'm going to round up to the nearest hundredths place. So I would have that x equals 6.45. And then for my second solution, I have 8 minus the square root of 24, all divided by 2. So that's my other solution, which I'm going to again round up to the nearest hundredths place, so it's going to be 1.55. Okay, so that's it for number 1. So let's go to number 2. So again, I can see that my equation is set up the way I need it to be. So I can go ahead and start listing out my a, b, and c. So a here is going to be 2, b is going to be negative 16, and c is going to be 27. So now let's put it into our equation. So we have that x equals negative my b value, which is negative 16, plus minus the square root of negative 16 squared minus 4 times a times c. I'm running out of room here. All divided by 2 times a. Okay, so let's start simplifying. So again, these two negatives give me a positive 16. Plus minus, so let's see what is inside of our square root here. So I have negative 16 squared minus 4 times my a times my c. So that gives me 40. So that's going to be 16 plus or minus the square root of 40, all divided by 2 times 2 gives me 4. So now I'm going to break these up. So 1 is going to be 16 plus the square root of 40 divided by 4. And the other one's going to be 16 minus the square root of 40 divided by 4. Okay, So let's use our calculator here. So 16 plus the square root of 40 divided by 4 gives me that value. So again, I'm going to round up to the nearest hundredths place. So that one solution would be 5.58. And now let's enter this one. I have 16 minus the square root of 40, all divided by 4. So that's my other solution. And again, rounding up to the nearest hundredth, I would have 2.42. So those are my two solutions. Okay. All right, so now for number 3, this one, my equation is not set equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is just subtract x squared from both sides so that I have to do the least amount of work as possible. So then I would have 0 equals negative x squared minus 10x minus 2. So now I'm ready to list out all my values. So A is negative 1, B is negative 10, and C is negative 2. So now to find my solutions, I would have negative, and then my B value, plus minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, sorry, I'm running out of room here, all divided by 2 times A. Okay, so now let's simplify. So the two negatives give me a positive, so I have 10 plus or minus. So now to figure out what this is inside of my square root, I have negative 10 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 2. And that gives me 92. So I have 10 plus or minus the square root of 92 divided by 2 times negative 1 gives me a negative 2. Okay, so now when I break them up, I have 10 plus the square root of 92 divided by 2, and 10 minus the square root of 92 divided by 2. So now my solution would be, we're going to start here. So 10 plus the square root of 92 divided by negative, these are supposed to be negative 2. And I'm going to round this up to the nearest hundredths place, so that would give me negative 9.80. And then my solution for this one, I have 10 minus the square root of 92 divided by negative 2. So that's my other value, and again I'm going to round it up to the nearest hundredths place, so it will just be negative 0.20. And those are my solutions. Okay, so let's move over here to this side. So number 4. Okay, so again I have to have my equation set up to be equal to 0. So in order to do that, I'm just going to add n squared to both sides. So then that would give me n squared minus 3n minus 7 equals 0. So from here I can see that a equals 1. B equals negative 3, and C equals negative 7. Now we can set up our formula. So we have negative B plus minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2A. Okay, so now we will simplify this. So again, two negatives give me a positive. Let's see what goes on the inside here. I have negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 7. Okay, so that gives me a value of 37. So I have 3 plus or minus the square root of 37, all divided by 2, because 2 times 1 is just 2. All right. So now starting with just with the addition part of it, I would have 3 plus the square root of 37 divided by 2. So one of my solutions, rounding to the nearest hundredth, would be 4.54. And now I'm going to do the subtraction one. So 3 minus square root of 37, all divided by 2. So my other solution would be negative 1.54. Okay. All right, so now number 5. Okay, so now to get my equation set equal to 0 for this one, I'm just going to add 7 to both sides. So then I have 0 equals negative 4t squared plus t plus 7. So now let's identify A, B, and C. A is going to be negative 4. B is going to be 1. C is going to be 7. Now we have x equals negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Okay, so that means this equals negative 1 plus minus, and let's figure out what's inside of this. So 1 squared minus 4 times negative 4 times 7 gives me 113. So I would have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 113, all divided by 2 times negative 4 gives me a negative 8. So now starting with the addition, I have negative 1 plus the square root of 113 divided by negative 8. So rounding to the nearest hundredths, I would have one solution as negative 1.20. Now doing the subtraction one, I have negative 1 minus the square root of 113, all divided by negative 8. And again, rounding to the nearest 100th, I would have 1.45 as my other solution. I'm sorry. Okay, and now last one on the front side here. So now my equation is already set up in the form that it needs to be because it's set equal to 0. So now I can just go ahead and list out my A, B, and C. So A is going to be 1, B is going to be 2, C is going to be negative 6. So then I would have x equals negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay, so to simplify, we have 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 6. So that gives me 28. So I have negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 28, all divided by 2 times 1 gives me 2. So then for my solutions, starting with the addition, I have negative 2 plus the square root of 28 divided by 2. So we're going to round that to the nearest 100th place. So that one solution would be 1.65. And then our other one, this time we'll do the subtraction. So negative 2 minus the square root of 28 divided by 2. So then my other solution would be negative 3.65. Okay. All right, so now let's flip it over to the back side. All right, so 7 through 9, we have to write the quadratic functions going backwards, given the quadratic formula with the values already substituted. So what we want to do here is let's label what each of these are that are inside of our square root here, since we know that all of the terms are in here. So this is going to be B, this is going to be A, and this is going to be C. So A is 2, B is 2, and C is -5. Okay, so when I write my function in standard form, I have 2x squared, that takes care of my ax squared, plus 2x, that takes care of bx, minus 5, which is my c, equals 0. Okay, so now for my exact answer, I'm just going to simplify my radical and leave it in that form before I find my actual answers. Okay, so starting up here, I know that it's going to start with -2 plus or minus. So then, let's see, 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times -5. That gives me 44. So I have the square root of 44, all divided by 2 times 2, which gives me 4. Okay, so now I want to simplify this radical because I know it's not a perfect number, but I know it probably contains a perfect number. So what I can do is go to my calculator into y equals, do 44 divided by x. Then we're going to go to the table, and we're looking for when we have a perfect number and then another number that can't be factored any further into any other perfect numbers. So when I go down, I see I have 4 and 11. And I know this is what I want because 11 is prime, it can't be factored any further, and 4 is a perfect number. So that means if I were to take the square root of 44, this actually equals the square root of 4 times 11. So now I know I can take the square root of 4, but I can't take the square root of 11. So when I do that, I would have, so writing this back out, -2 plus or minus, so the square root of 4 is 2, and what's going to remain inside there is my 11, all divided by 4. So that is going to be my exact answer. And now for my rounded answers, I'm going to first start with my addition, and then I'll go to my subtraction. So I have -2 plus 2 times the square root of 11, all divided by 4. Again, rounding to the nearest 100ths. One solution is going to be 1.16. And now I'll do the subtraction. So -2 minus 2 times the square root of 11 divided by 4. So my second solution is going to be -2.16. Okay. Moving on to number 8. So again, inside of my square root is where I'm going to identify each of my terms. So this is B, this is A, and this is C. So A is -3, B is 4, and C is 4. So now my function in standard form is going to be -3x squared plus 4x plus, oops, I was about to put C, plus 4 equals 0. All right, so now for my exact answer, I know it's going to start with -4 plus minus. So now let's see what this value is. So we have 4 squared minus 4 times -3 times 4. So that gives me 64. So I have -4 plus or minus the square root of 64, all divided by 2 times -3, which gives me a -6. All right. So 64 is actually a perfect number, so I can actually simplify this even further to be -4 plus or minus, and the square root of 64 is 8, and that's all going to be divided by -6. So here's my exact answers, and now when I break them down into my two solutions, I get, so starting with the addition, I have -4 plus 8, all divided by 6. So that gives me 2/3. Or some of y'all might have yours rounded to 0.67, and that works as well. And then for my other one, I do the subtraction So -4 minus 8 divided by 6 gives me -2. So those are my two solutions for that function. Okay, last one, number 9. Same thing, let's identify each of the terms inside of the square root. So this is B, this is A, and this is C. So my A value is 2, my B value is -16, and my C value is 32. So my function in standard form is going to be 2x squared minus 16x plus 32 equals 0. So now let's find out what our exact answer is going to be. So we know it's going to start off with 16 plus minus. Okay, so now let's simplify what we have inside of our square root. So we have -16 squared minus 4 times 2 times 32. Which comes out to be 0. So then I would have 16 plus or minus the square root of 0 divided by 2 times 2, which gives me 4. And the square root of 0 is just 0. And we know that this, when I take the square root of 0 and have 0, if I were to say 16 plus 0, I would still have 16. And if I said 16 minus 0, I would still have 16. So it's just going to be one solution that we find here from 16 divided by 4. So when we do 16 divided by 4, we see that our solution is 4. And that completes this worksheet.